job to do preventing sabotage. This weekend brought two major attacks. ABC's John Berman reports.
Taps ran dry in parts of Baghdad after a water main burst, sending a geyser into the air. Witnesses called it an act of sabotage. I saw two men go under the tunnel carrying a bag, he says. Minutes later, I heard a massive explosion. If it is sabotage, it is hardly an isolated incident. This oil pipeline is also burning for a third day near Tikrit. The loss in oil revenues could cost Iraq $7 million a day. Officials here say the people behind the violence are being paid to complicate U.S. efforts to rebuild. Last night, several Iraqis were killed and wounded in a mortar attack on a Baghdad prison. A cameraman for the Reuters news agency was killed trying to film the aftermath. The U.S. has other problems besides violence and sabotage, namely trying to heal new wounds with Shia Muslims, who make up the majority of the population here. With pipes bursting and soldiers still dying, this is a problem the U.S. does not need. John Berman, ABC News, Baghdad.
We're looking at Iraq issues with two experts from Boston University. Bob Zelnick is chair of the journalism department there, and Farouk El-Baz is from the Center for Remote Sensing. He served as an advisor to the late Egyptian President Anwar Sadat from 1978 to 81. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Bob, let's start with you. There's no question after attacks like this on the water main and on the oil pipelines that Iraqis are angry. But at whom?
Well, I think they're angry at both parties. The message that the terrorists, the saboteurs are trying to send is that the United States cannot protect you and cannot guard these soft targets. And I think the people of Iraq, from all reports, are incensed at the saboteurs, but they're also angry that the United States has not been able to do more in the way of providing security. And I think it's a critical test for the U.S. at this time.
Farouk, do you buy that analysis?
Yes.
And pox on both their houses, I guess.
Yeah, they are. In addition to the fact that they are not really happy with the way they are being dealt with. They feel that there is an occupation force, and they are being dealt with very harshly by the American troops rather than by a police force. So there is a question mark of what goes on now.
Well, meaning the alternative is they believe that it's time, in your opinion, for an Iraqi police force to replace some of these functions? Is that what you're talking about?
Very much so. If it's not Iraqi, maybe Egyptian or Jordanian or somebody that can talk to them in their language and so on, rather than these guys who brandish the weapons and speak to them in a language they don't understand and shout and all of that.
Bob?
You know, I think there was definitely a misjudgment on the part of the occupying Americans. They felt that they could decapitate the Ba'ath Party, so to speak, and they'd have a bunch of happy civil servants ready to be policemen and firemen and do all the other things that that had to be done inside Iraq. It was kind of like the post-war German occupation, where they destroyed the upper echelon of the Nazi Party, and they had 20 million civil servants running around trying to make the trains run on time.
Now, so what do we do from here on the, I mean, let's go back to the sabotage thing for a second. It seems to me to be a very effective tactic, not very person-intensive, causes great damage, great consternation on a number of fronts. How do we deal with the security issues Bob mentioned a minute ago around things like electricity and water and fuel? What do we do?
The American soldiers are taught to fight and kill. They do not know how to police. If you need a very large number of policemen, you cannot depend on the American forces, or you cannot depend on the fuel.
But if you sign up to be a cop, an Iraqi cop, you're essentially putting a target on your back. Are you not, Farouk, for other Iraqi dissidents to aim at you?
I'm not talking about Iraqis only. I'm talking about it's about time that we consider the fact that we are not doing it right, and we have to involve others. Others like police forces from Arab countries, or at least somebody that these people can communicate with rather than a military force.
Bob Zelnick, because of Arnold Schwarzenegger, attention apparently has been directed away from this to lots of other things. How are we doing on August 18th in this rebuilding phase in Iraq?
I think the record is mixed. Now, we do have this governing council in place. They're not really governing yet, but they are a council, and they have some legitimacy because many of them, anyway, seem to represent legitimate constituencies in Iraq. The Security Council has welcomed their presence now. So and there are parts of the country where there are local administrations in place. I think the big picture is clouded by misjudgments on the part of the United States. We didn't quite appreciate how factionalized the country was, how much hostility would be engendered by our presence there. I do agree completely with Farouk El-Baz that it's time to expand the police force until the Iraqis themselves are able to be trained and provide that kind of security. I do think it would be important to get others in there, particularly from the Arab states.
Well, how about from the United States, for example? There's been some resistance to bring more U.S. troops because of the whole fight before this thing began as to what we need in quote, post-war Iraq. The interim oil minister, who allegedly has U.S. support, says there are not nearly enough troops, that he's told the United States that, and they don't give him any answers.
Well, I think there has to be a greater security presence, but I'm not sure it should be troops for the reason that Mr. El-Baz mentioned, that the troops are not necessarily trained in that area. The other thing that's very important, and I think from the domestic side, you talk about Arnold Schwarzenegger. Well, there's a domestic political side to this. The thing that would be far worse than what's gone on now is if the United States, under political pressure internally, was forced to cut and run. An American withdrawal would be a disaster, and those critics who legitimately pick on some things that the administration did wrong ought to keep that in mind also.
How would you rate the rebuilding performance, Farouk, as of today?
Right now it's very dismal. There is no question about the fact that there was no need to dismantle all of the Iraqi ministries. There was more need for post-war planning. And the situation as it is right now, people are not getting the basic services, so the reconstruction, in my view, has not begun yet.
Now, when we read in the New York Times in the last couple of days that it will take roughly 2 years to fully restore electricity across Iraq, if the average Iraqi were to read that article or have that communicated to him or her, what does that do about his or her confidence in the ability of the, let's call them the coalition forces, to rebuild their country in relatively rapid fire? At the same time, by the way, that they saw people in New York City complaining because they didn't have power for 18 hours.
Well, I think if the Iraqi reading it in the New York Times was sophisticated enough, he'd recognize that there are legitimate problems, that you just can't put a switch and expect to have electricity.
Well, what do you say to that Iraqi, though, Bob, when you have to admit that the state of electricity provision is at pre-war levels, worse than it was under Saddam Hussein?
Well, I would say that Iraqi ought to enlist his friends in working for the security of existing systems and against saboteurs and against those who are trying to hit soft targets and embarrass the United States.
Farouk, I want to switch gears for a second. We read on the front page of the Boston Globe today that top intelligence officers are being shifted away from the pursuit of Osama bin Laden and the work in Afghanistan over to Iraq to get Saddam Hussein to try to stabilize that country. Senator Graham, one of the candidates for president, has been one of the leaders, voted against the war resolution, saying we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. We can't fight the war on terror and prosecute the war in Iraq. Is this proof of that?
I think so, and I think that it's okay to shift things now because this Iraq situation is a lot more unstable than what is happening in Afghanistan.
So what does it mean for the war on terror? If one doesn't buy into the notion that this is Iraq is the centerpiece of the war on terror, what do you do?
They're both unstable, but I think the consequences of instability in Iraq are graver than instability in Afghanistan. I think the administration has done a very poor job in Afghanistan after its initial military success. They haven't devoted the resources, they haven't devoted the personnel, they haven't brought in enough outsiders. Security is diminishing in that country. The warlords are back, the heroin production is back, and even the Taliban are back in certain parts of the country.
But Bob, you two are relatively smart guys. I would say there are a couple of relatively smart guys in the administration and women as well. You both agree that we need more international cooperation. You both agree we need a stronger United States presence. Why doesn't the administration just do the one thing they can do, which is get more of our own people involved at the same time that they're trying to rebuild a coalition? Why doesn't that happen?
Because I think they're also conscious of the expense. They're conscious of the political difficulty that it makes. Look at all the complaining that's being done by the families of the servicemen who are posted in Iraq today. even the servicemen themselves started complaining in interviews with the Western media before their commanders got to them.
I think in addition to that, also there is a macho appeal there. The fact that we did this and we can fix it, and we knew what's going to happen, and we are prepared to fix it.
We want to discuss one other thing. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we only have a second here. We talked about the tactic taken by the saboteurs. I want to talk about a new tactic coming from the U.S. side. I don't know if you're aware of this at all. Do you see this photograph of Saddam? This is real. Saddam Hussein as Zsa Zsa Gabor. Now, wait a second. You're also going to see Saddam Hussein in a second as the king, Elvis Presley. In and around Tikrit, these posters are going up. And here's the notion. Here's the notion between the U.S. posting of these things, that it will so aggravate, the look in your face is unbelievable, that it will so aggravate supporters of Saddam Hussein that it will draw them out. What do you think of that tactic?
Well, I hesitate to substitute my judgment for military intelligence.
Feel free, go right ahead.
I think it's insane. I'd rather look at pictures of Arnold Schwarzenegger all day
That's
long.
coming too. How about you, Farouk?
I think it's an insult to any Iraqi, whether